Welcome to our podcast. We have a very special guest, Florence Williams. She is a journalist, author, and podcaster whose work focusing on the often unseen links between human health, psychology, and the natural world. She is a fellow at the Center for Humans and Nature and a visiting scholar at George Washington University. She's also a certified forest bathing guide and experienced workshop leader. So, Florence, welcome to this. I also note that you've written three award-winning books. Um, Number one, Breasts. Number two, The Nature Fix, Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative. And more recently, Heartbreak, Personal and Scientific Journey. So, tell us about your little bit about your background and your work so far. I'm particularly interested in the aspect of the health benefits of being in nature. We now know that there are a lot of health benefits. There is a decrease in um, chronic diseases. It's good for your vitamin D, and it's good for your mental health. So over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. As you noted, I'm an environmental and science journalist, have been for many decades now. And when my career started, I was writing kind of standard environmental topics like about air pollution or national forest policy. But at some point I got really more interested in the human picture there. I was interested in how does our sort of planetary health affect our individual health? And part of that journey for me was becoming a mother, learning at some point that there were environmental toxins, industrial toxins in the breast milk that I was giving my daughter. And so that launched my first book, which was really an investigation of how this body part sort of takes on the consequences of our planetary health. And what does that mean for us? What does it mean for our infants? I was really interested in breasts and telling the environmental history of this body part. And then for my second book, The Nature Fix, which I think is largely what we're talking about here, I became kind of more interested in the good ways that our environment can influence our health. How do we become our best selves, live our healthiest lives psychologically and physically by interacting with what's good on the planet? And then my most recent book is called Heartbreak. And that was really about the ways that heartbreak, this emotional pain, kind of affects our immune system and our bodies and how we kind of internalize, the sort of emotional pain and then ways to heal from that, which are largely derived from connecting to each other, but also to the natural world.
Yes, you say in your book that we've become disconnected from nature. I'm guessing that's to do with modern living. Obviously, we spend a lot of time in our homes and our offices. We know it's beneficial. So, what would you suggest to get people to be more connected to nature?
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's important to understand the setup, which is that really never before in the history of our species have we spent so little time outside.
Right.
And our bodies and our brains evolved outside. We evolved to read natural landscapes. Our perceptual systems, know how to look at a forest and a river and a lake and kind of understand how how those environments can help us and serve us and save our lives, and also how we can have a reciprocal relationship, right, with the natural world in a way that's beneficial to both. But now we spend, 95% of our time inside. We are living in the middle of the largest mass migration in human history, and that's the migration indoors.
Right.
At the same time, it's the migration to big cities. By 2030, more than 70% of us around the world will be living in big cities. And so these are new habitats really for our human bodies. And so it's important to understand what we've lost and to see how that's affecting us. I mean, this is kind of like an an unknown experiment, really. But the diseases of the indoors include things like obesity, diabetes, metabolic disease, depression, anxiety, vitamin D deficiency, which leads to a whole cascade of other problems. When children are not spending time outside, their eyes are not developing properly and their retinas are misshaped, actually, and that's leading to a worldwide epidemic of nearsightedness. So I think it's important to understand that and then, try to think about how we can possibly get some of these benefits back, especially the emotional ones, because these are increasingly challenging in our modern world.
Yeah. So, how much time do you spend out in nature?
Well, I try to spend a little bit of time every day, even if it's 10 minutes for my dog walk. I live in a city. I live in Denver.
Mhm.
But one thing I have learned to do through the writing of the Nature Fix is kind of optimize the benefits of being outside and learning to find really some sensory tidbits of nature, even in a city. So, I make a big effort to walk on streets that have more trees. When I'm doing that, I make another effort to cue my senses and to say, what kinds of patterns am I seeing in these pine needles or in the snowflakes? Let's look at this bark for a minute and just see how beautiful it is. What birds am I hearing?
Mhm.
What is the sky doing? Are there interesting clouds? If I walk at sunset, which I make an effort to do, I want to look at that. Even when you're in a city, you can look up. You can look at the sky, see what the moon is doing. I think, I often walk after dinner and I try to see like what phase is the moon in. There are these little subtle ways that we can try to connect to the circularity of the natural world, to the systems of the natural world, and then to the sensory details that we know are so good for our emotional health.
That's good. And I think it's also keeps you in the present moment. That is really beneficial thing. You can't be observing the sky, the blue sky, or the magnificent just a tree with all its leaves. You really can't look at those things and pay attention without being in the present moment. So yes, my wife really likes walking the dog. She observes the trees and birds, and that's very therapeutic. What about what forest bathing? You've mentioned that in your bio, or I mentioned it. What is that? It's intriguing.
Yes. Well, the reason I got interested in this particular book was I got an assignment from Outside Magazine to write about what the science had to say about why we feel better when we're outside. And so I looked for places where I could see science actually ongoing, participate in it, possibly witness it. And I went to Japan because Japan was doing these ongoing studies looking at people's nervous systems, looking at their physiological response to being on these forest trails. That actually, importantly, Japan calls them forest therapy trails, and there are something like 48, at least by now, designated forest therapy trails in Japan. And these researchers were measuring what happens to people even after 15 or 20 minutes in these trails. And what they do on these trails is they practice something called forest bathing. So this is not actually an ancient Japanese practice. It was really propagated by the government in the 1980s as a response to rapid industrialization and the stress that was putting on populations. So Japan had very high rates of worker suicide, very high rates of cardiovascular disease, diseases related to stress. The practice of forest bathing, as I learned, really does not involve disrobing or taking off your clothes. It's a way to actually actively open up all five of your senses,
Right.
sort of in the manner of sunbathing, where you're passively receiving
Mhm.
these cues around you. And so what the Japanese researchers have found is that even after 15 minutes of feeling present in the moment, opening your senses, um, feeling the breeze on your cheek, feeling the sunlight on your skin, smelling the forest around you. And the Japanese forests are filled with these wonderful evergreen trees, these cypress trees that emit these wonderful chemicals that they've now linked to healthier immune systems. in humans, which is interesting. But they found that there's a 16% reduction in stress hormone, cortisol, after 15 minutes of this.
Right.
Also, a slowing of respiration, a drop in blood pressure. Subsequent studies, even since I was there, have shown better blood sugar regulation in people who are walking in nature. It really seems to shift our nervous systems into a more parasympathetic state. And that, of course, has a cascade of benefits in terms of how our immune system works, how our digestion works, how our cells are doing transcription factors that are linked to reduced inflammation. The benefits just go on and on. But what was fascinating to me was that the forest bathing, it seems to be kind of a shortcut to some of these benefits. And so during the pandemic, I decided to get certified as a forest bathing guide, which is kind of taken off in this country, actually, since I wrote that article for Outside. And as the country has increased in symptoms of anxiety and depression, these practices have become increasingly popular, and they're offered in places like arboretums or botanical gardens. So, wherever your listeners are, they can probably find some forest bathing programs to participate in. They're typically 2 to 3 hours long, and they involve kind of invitations offered by the guide to just connect, to different elements in the natural world around you.
Yeah, that's very good. You mentioned stress, and a lot of people are stressed out and anxious, and this would be a good way, a very effective, simple way to decrease stress and increase health and well-being. I've also note that nature can boost the immune system, so. There are so many benefits, and it's almost like we have two worlds, the inside world and the outside world. And maybe we need to shift more, or at least have more, activities out and in the outside and in nature. I'm going to recommend that everybody read your book. Actually, there aren't as many books out there that are as good as yours. Um, but nature is increasingly seen as very important. So I want to thank you for coming on and talking about your books, and then maybe we can come back and talk about one of your other books. So again, thank
Anytime, anytime. Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure.
you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.